Persistence. We read it in fortune cookies. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Question: does the state of Israel exemplify persistence better than any place on earth? We start with a story. Shvat Shaked of Israel's Fraud Sciences pitches the president of PayPal, Scott Thompson, with a new way to hunt down internet crooks. The idea was pretty simple. Good people leave traces, footprints on the internet, not crooks. Zoom in on the transactions without footprints, and you've likely found a crook. How did this Israeli upstart come upon this brilliant deduction? From nuts and bolts Israeli techniques of tracking terrorists online. From the world of Israeli military intelligence comes something applicable to modern business. Let's call it cross-pollination. Shaked was given a test by his new acquaintance. Analyze 140,000 PayPal transactions for fraud. This was a staggering number, but Shaked quickly improvised. He automated his new system and identified the fraudulent transactions with lightning speed. PayPal's head honcho was amazed. Scott Thompson offered to buy Fraud Sciences. But Shaked surprisingly declined. He was convinced that his new company was worth $200 million. In the end, he settled on $169 million. In typical Israeli fashion, he played it straight. There was no monkey business. The Hebrew slang word for this behavior, borrowed from Arabic, is dugri. It means straight ahead, no hemming and hawing, no playing games. You just tell it like it is. Israeli business principle number 1. And by the way, if you have a good idea, you stick with it. And before long, Fraud Sciences came up with the first generation of antivirus computer technology. The second generation was the firewall, developed by an Israeli company called Check Point, now worth $5 billion. When American executives visit the headquarters of Fraud Sciences, they're amazed. There's no dozing off, no texting on the job, no web surfing. What they find instead is a curious attribute called pride. How does that corporate ethos compare with what we find at American companies? Or with students? Walk into a company meeting in Israel, and everyone is asking penetrating questions, unconventional, with no inhibitions. There's a word for it in Hebrew. Chutzpah. There's another term that particularly applies to Israeli society. The nickname barometer. Amazingly, it's a very informal culture. Everybody has a nickname. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is Bibi. The late Ariel Sharon was Arik. IDF Chief of Staff Moshe Ya'alon is Bogi. The IDF chief in the 1980s was Moshe Levy, called Moshe V'chetzi, Moshe and a half, because of his towering stature. Israel, of course, has a very formidable army, but it too is surprisingly informal. That in turn fosters a willingness to learn lessons, no matter what the outcome. How do you learn lessons if you don't have the flexibility to ask tough questions, to challenge everything? In that sense, the IDF is value neutral. Even in failure, you gain something. And when you succeed, we don't cheerlead you. Compare that with American society, or with how American children are raised these days. There's almost an expectation to be praised no matter what the performance. How about a little value neutrality? In Israel, such values transfer from the military to civilian life. While you're not constantly being praised, there's also a high tolerance for failure, and that's reflected in rather progressive bankruptcy laws. Israelis know that failed entrepreneurs have a 1 in 5 chance of succeeding the next time. And the brutal honesty built into discourse and communication feeds the desire to succeed. Native-born Israelis are called sabras, cactuses, nice and soft on the inside, but rather prickly on the outside. But is rudeness actually an asset? Direct questions are asked in Israel. How old are you? What does that cost? How much money do you make? The old saying is true, put 2 Jews together and you have 3 opinions. These aren't just random observations. They're crucial for Israel's success. And not just for Israeli companies, but it's argued that the very survival of Intel depended on Israel. What? A bit overstated, perhaps? The truth is, Intel happens to be the largest private sector employer in Israel today. Intel's Haifa team designed the 8088 chip, which was then built in Jerusalem. That's how Intel won a crucially important contract with IBM. But a new problem arose. Computer clock speed caused overheating, resulting in what computer geeks called a power wall. Enter David Dadi Perlmutter and Ronnie Friedman from Israel's version of MIT, the Technion. The solution? Typically unconventional. Circumvent the whole power wall problem with the computer version of a gear shift. The computer can actually operate faster and better with a slower clock speed as long as it's changing gears. American corporate executives saw a problem. Everyone wants faster and faster clock speeds. The Israeli team saw an asset. The computer's engine would turn more slowly, while the result would be faster and better processing. The solution was typically out of the box and consistent with the Israeli culture and mentality. It was Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, who admonished his people to discard conventional thinking. Or as Steve Jobs put it, think different. Faced with a good deal of opposition, the Israeli team persisted. They made frequent trips to Intel's California headquarters in Santa Clara. Through persistence, they made their case and won the argument. Israeli society, after all, cultivates a culture of disagreement and debate. The adage is, maximize resistance. Imagine adopting that adage in our educational system instead of teaching to the test. But it's not about disagreement for the sake of disagreement. You need better research and better data to make your case. The result? A new chip designed in a place called Banyas, after the freshwater spring in northern Galilee. Twice the price, but you get portability and speed, and that sells. Can we generalize anything about the Israeli entrepreneur? Thinking outside the box, hooked to an electronic device, perhaps an iPhone, a Mac, or an Android, and consuming plenty of coffee, hummus, and pita, with some sushi and vegetables thrown into the mix. The lesson? Innovative response to changing conditions. In 2006, competition caused everything to decline, market share to plummet. That was Intel's problem. The response? Core 2 Duo chips, the successor to the Pentium, an Israeli design that also embodied eco technology, $2 billion of savings in electricity costs. The key? Willingness to take on higher authorities. Add to that some impudence. No talking behind people's backs. Call it dugri. Intel actually started cross-cultural seminars for its employees on Israeli culture. The idea: learn a few Israeli attributes. Challenge the obvious. Ask questions. Debate everything. Innovate, innovate, innovate.